Great. Well, everyone, welcome to Spy Cam. This is our new podcast, first episode. Woo!
Yeah.
And this is how I'm breaking my streaming cherry, if you will. This is the first time I've ever streamed before, and I thought, what way to kick it off? Then I would put some content out there that I think the industry could use to give an opportunity for possibly people who want to get into the industry, people who are already in but want to learn a little more about other areas, any of those type of things where we can talk about what's kind of going on and give people a feel for what's the inside scoop on the esports industry. Because I know a couple years ago when I was on the outside looking in, I had no clue. How does someone get into entertainment? How does someone get into the industry? So, for those of you who don't know Splyce, we're an organization that we have a website where you can go and find out what's on at any time in esports. We also have some of the top names in esports writing that write for us: Thorin, Lurpus, EG, and Control. We've recently added a couple of new writers for Dota, Scant and Suntsu, and a bunch of others I'm not thinking of right now. And I'm one of the founders of the company. We also have a pro team. Sorry, I skipped that as well. We also have a pro team in League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Smash, World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, and I'm forgetting a game right now because I can't count. Hearthstone, thank you. And that's who we are. And I'm one of the original founders of the company. Robert is here with me today from AlphaDraft/FanDuel. Robert, why don't you go ahead and take a second, introduce yourself and who you are.
Sure. Hey guys. Yeah, I'm Robert. I am the director of biz dev and esports for AlphaDraft. AlphaDraft is a subsidiary company now of FanDuel. We do basically the equivalent of fantasy sports, fantasy football for esports. So we run a fantasy esports platform. Currently, we are running 4 different games on there. So we do run League of Legends, CS:GO, Dota 2, and Smite. That could change at any time, but those are the things that we currently like to promote. We're ideally going to grow much bigger and have a lot more games and a lot more fun things to do.
Excellent. Jumping into why am I having a podcast here today, right? Like, why Robert and I here talking? So the goal is to have a weekly podcast where people can come, especially if you're young, looking at the industry and learn all the different sides. So Robert's here today to talk a little bit about his role, where he got into the industry, how he ended up in daily fantasy. He's also worked for some other organizations that he'll get to talk to you about before. Robert's an old vet, we'll say, of the industry. But we have a bunch of other guests already lined up for you in future weeks that will help look at lots of different sides of the industry. So first question I'm going to ask everybody, because I think this is always the most interesting, is Robert, how did you get into esports?
Yeah, this is definitely a question I get a lot. It's kind of interesting. A lot of people, you could call me an old vet to some degree, but I'm actually someone who was really interested in esports from a really young age, and then I kind of, it didn't take off very quickly, in my opinion. At that time, I'm talking like late '90s, early 2000s.
Right.
I used to be a Counter-Strike 1.6 pro, and that was like my whole life and my whole thing. But once I got to the age to go to college, I realized, there wasn't really much to be done unless you were like Fatality. I was really good at the game. I was really good at what I did. It was a much smaller world then. So I went to school and had what you'd call a normal, traditional life. I still played a lot of Counter-Strike. I played Source. I played some Battlefield. I played Dota. A lot of games. Always followed, kind of what was going on. But I wasn't as close to it for a while. I ended up, doing a software development type business analyst job for a while. I eventually went to grad school, got my master's in business. But partway through there, I actually a game came out in beta. You might have heard of this game. It's called League of Legends.
Never heard of it. What is that?
Yeah, it's some people play it. But basically, I saw that game, and I actually did a pretty substantial paper about it because I believed that game and Riot Games was kind of going to be the next big thing. The main focus for why I believed that was basically the free-to-play model, taking kind of back then Facebook games were kind of the rage at that time. This would have been like talking about 2009-ish. So that was being adopted by Riot Games and League of Legends, and so I believed their model was going to be possibly, well, I thought it'd be superior to any other game out there. And on top of that, they designed a game with the intent of it being a sport in the near future, and that seemed pretty obvious early on. Again, it's easy to say I'm a hipster, and I was like there before it was cool, but hey, I was playing League of Legends all the time, and I was like, this is the best. I love this. This game's going somewhere. I kind of got, to be honest, Marty, I kind of got laughed at in school. Everyone else was doing these projects on like like I was at San Diego State, so it's not like it was like Harvard or anything, right? People are doing stuff about like Coca-Cola and surfboards and
Right.
things, and I'm like, this game, like the video game industry and the esports industry is gonna go big. So that was kind of like my peek into that, and then I was just all about Dota 2 and League of Legends. Dota 2 because they had the first international, which was like $1 million, and it was like a big publicity thing for that. Um, and then I started watching, teams like Navi, and then I started watching Counter Logic Gaming for League of Legends. Uh, I basically followed Hotshot GG. I don't know, some of you guys might have heard of this person.
Yeah, I don't know who that guy is, huh?
Um, and so I was like, wow, that guy's really good. Like, I really like that. And on sealgaming.net, there were some openings for very basic positions. And I don't mean to be basic, but basically like part-time editors for articles and things like that.
Right.
And I applied to one of those. I was like, okay, you know what? It doesn't hurt to try. My real dream was to get out of, I really liked what I did, but it wasn't like my true passion. I mean,
Right.
it paid the bills and it was decent, but I wanted to actually be a video game designer slash producer. But I thought, I was kind of torn between esports and the actual creation side of making a game. Anyway, I took a shot with that. I thought no matter what, it'll look okay on the resume. I'm going to keep my normal job, be an editor for Counter Logic Gaming. The long story short on that is I went from editor to marketing something. I don't know what the title was. We'll say marketing manager to chief operating officer.
I laugh about that because we have a running joke in the office about a couple of folks who work here, Jenna and Jonathan, who have the titles community manager, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
been a joke for 3 or 4 months that that's not even close to all they do. Like they're the glue that holds this office together, and we have some pretty cool titles for some people. And we said, eventually we'll figure out what to call you guys. But you guys transcend titles at this point. So
Makes sense. I mean, especially, in a startup, people have to wear a lot of hats and the titles don't always do you justice. I will
yeah,
say this is a shameless plug, but one of the things I did before AlphaDraft was actually I did get to do some game design and I worked on a project. It was a game called Cards and Castles. It's a mobile app slash Steam game
mhm.
now, and my title there was Master of Coin.
All
And
right,
I'm very
that's
proud of
awesome.
that. Yes, I'm very
Well,
proud of this.
I don't know if you've seen Nick Allen's titles himself, Director of Dank Memes and Strategy on LinkedIn. So there's a great example of, I love that about our industry where you can literally put that, and that's a legit title in my opinion. So,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
well, it's interesting hearing your background because I'm the opposite, right? Where you've been doing this since you were young, and I personally, because a lot of people don't know, maybe know who I am. I started in the entertainment industry on the other side of the coin. So I went to school back in the 90s, long time ago, and got my bachelor's in theater. And then I moved to New York City because I was going to be a famous actor, I thought, like everybody else. And that dream lasted for about a day and a half before reality struck and realized you make no money and so on and so forth. And so I spent 7.5 years in New York City working in theater and film and television and was really quite successful at it. I traveled the world. I got to work with many amazing, famous people. I was lucky enough to teach at a performing arts high school for 3 years. So there are celebrities on television I see. I'm like, hey, I used to teach you when you were a kid, and that's pretty fun. And but what was really cool about it is I managed to not ever have to wait tables or work at a hotel or something like that for 7.5 years in New York City. And
Good job, Marty. I'm proud
yeah,
of you.
I mean, it's like that's my mark of pride, right? Because that's very rare. And I built sets and I hung lights and I produced shows and stuff like that to get there. And then I moved back to Rochester, New York, where I live now. And my wife and I wanted to have kids, so I'm an old man in the industry, as they say. I'm like past my mid 30s, and we've got 3 kids and a house in the suburbs and all that kind of hilarious. We don't have a white picket fence, though. I'll tell you that, no white picket fence. So, but I went into manufacturing, and I did that for a little while as my quote unquote real job, the one that's going to supply my family with income for many years to come. And it was okay. Like I liked my job, I guess, but I didn't love my job. And I had left theater where I loved my job, right? And about 2.5 years ago, I was blogging on the side because I needed something to fulfill my like creative need, I guess. And it was the most niche blog you can imagine. PvP Moonkin. So I had like a
Ooh,
hundred loyal
look this up.
readers. It was called laserchicken.com. I don't think it even exists anymore. I think I lost the URL or something. But it was just a regular weekly blog where I'd post different guides and strats and stuff on how to do PvP laser chicken, Moonkin. And of course, audience being very small, I eventually got moved on to looking for some other things. And I got picked up by this company where I was helping them put up some tournaments because I'd done production, right? Productions are productions, whether it's a theater show, a television show, or esports. And I was like, well, this is really fun. I really like this. And ended up not working with them for a long period of time because they're down in Texas. I'm up in Rochester, and Rochester and Texas are like two different countries, as you know. And I wanted to stay where my family is. And so now this is about just over a year ago. We're having our third kid, and I kind of got the inkling of trying to do something with esports again. And I gave a call to a buddy of mine I went to college with, and I said, hey, Vinny, esports is this thing I'm really passionate about. I'm a big fan. I watch enormous amounts of it. I almost don't watch any traditional sports anymore. And I used to be a huge basketball nut and a huge tennis nut and a huge football nut. And all I watch is Warcraft and League of Legends and Hearthstone and all these things. And I said, Hearthstone is this community where I love watching it, but it's incredibly hard to find anything to watch, right? It's just all fragmented. I would turn on a stream, almost over. And so then at the end, I ended up pitching this idea to him of a TV guide, and he thought it was a cool idea. So we start building it, and it was a hobby project side thing. I mean, it's kind of how a lot of esports, I feel like, somehow starts. Hey, we'll have a team, guys, and next thing you know, you're a major team in esports. What really kicked us into gear is we joined a competition here in Rochester for business plans. It was all different companies at different scopes, trying to win a little bit of cash and some credit for office space and stuff like that. And the crazy thing is we won. And you're mentioning about trying to explain what it is you did in your business class. I was thinking back to that. I'm up on stage like, so people play video games like professionally, and then a lot of us watch it, and the next guy up is like, I have this piece of farm equipment we've built. And they're like, yes, farm equipment, we get that. And I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I'm so screwed, right? Like, how do I fight with farm equipment when I'm in Midwest America mentality, right? But I had a lot of really great advisors, and that's the first piece of advice I give to a lot of people is find some people that have done startups, not even just esports, but have started companies before, and ask questions and toss ideas off of them. And they gave me lots of feedback, and I was accepting of it. And I said, oh yeah, my presentation sucks, right? Like, it takes me 14 minutes to explain what esports is in a 12-minute presentation. I haven't touched my company, right? And so I kind of, it's interesting to be kind of more of a newcomer to the space, yet I'm kind of old guard because entertainment's entertainment, right? And I've been doing that for 10 plus years. So my hope is to bring a little bit of that experience to esports, where theater's been around forever. So
That's awesome, Marty. That's really cool. Glad to have you here, by the way. Glad to have you here at esports.
This is
I'm sorry, I'm raising laser chicken right now. So
yeah. No, it's cool because
I'm looking at talents from 2 years ago. I apologize.
Oh, is the site still working? I didn't even realize it would still pop up
I'm not
there.
sure if this is yours or not. It's laserchicken.wordpress, but
Oh, because the original hosting probably went away. Yeah, it might be the same thing. I'm not even sure, to be completely honest. That'll be an FAQ for later, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean, I think esports is where I'm here to stay. This is my love and my passion. So, okay, so Robert, you heard a little bit of my obstacles. What were some obstacles you faced I mean, now you're in a place where you have a home, right? You're in a full-on company. You're in a place that has support of funding. I mean, like compared to, oh, I'm doing a new startup that's a team, or I'm starting up a website. Any of those things that a lot of people are trying to do, where it's a little less stable and they maybe don't have a salary to come into every week. What were some of the things that were in your way to getting to there? Because obviously it's been a long path.
sure. I mean, honestly, it's a little different for me, but there's a lot of people that have this story as well. There was I mean, we're talking like a good 10-year gap from when I was in esports and then not really.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I was a pro. That wasn't really much of a scene though back then. I mean, frankly, I won like unlimited balls energy drink. I don't know if you know what that is, Marty, but like that was the kind of stuff I was winning. We won like server hosting, balls energy drink, a few other things,
Right.
which that was really nice, but that wasn't paying for anything. We did win. I think the most I've ever won is like maybe $500.
Nice.
Yeah, that was really big back then. By the way, that was some big time cash. But
Yeah, for sure.
no, really for me, I mean, the difference was just being brave and taking the leap away from my safe career because I had a reasonably well paying job in a stable industry, in a traditional industry. I was actually the last career job I had before this was I was doing enterprise software for universities. And that's something that wasn't looking to go away soon, right? It's not
Right.
super fast moving. Um, but it took really the biggest obstacle was, could I leave that? Like, because I could do stuff for, back when I had met George and, his partner who was, the web developer of Seal Gaming, it was like, you know, the offer I had was not going to be something like what I was already making, to leave.
Yep.
And initially it was nothing, right? I didn't make anything. And so I had to decide, am I just going to keep this normal life, or am I going to go into something really dangerous and follow my passion? Um, it was a lot of challenges. I mean, to be honest, this was longer ago, but the girlfriend I had at the time, she wasn't all about this. She wasn't all about the
Right.
esports life. So right as I took that leap, my income went down. She ended up not wanting to follow me when I moved. She didn't want to go with, which was really kind of heartbreaking at the time.
Sure.
And so I kind of had to start and rebuild myself from scratch. Now, I mean, I had the background and knowledge about business, but it didn't matter that much. I mean, esports was so different. Starting something, a startup was totally different. Although, like, rules of accounting and financial modeling and whatever I thought was going to happen, none of those things happened, right? Like none of them. Working with George and them was just every day was a new challenge, and every day it was like, we could go away at any time. Like we don't know that, Counterlogic Gaming and like TSM and Dignitas were kind of they were like the big teams at the time, and
Right.
SK. Um, any day, like, what if League of Legends isn't the right game? Like, that was a question. Like, what if, like, streaming? What if ad blocks just kill our revenue from streaming? Like,
Yeah.
these are the things that we had to deal with and think about. Like, most of that early money was from, that was from, frankly, it was from the stream, from the players, and from like Hotshot, and that wasn't like guaranteed yet either. That was new, and you know, the stream platforms could totally control it and take too big of cut. Streaming could fall out of favor. Like I said, ad blocks could happen. A better game could come out, and we were done. Any one of these things could have made us be done, but really, we just had to keep going. We just had to keep every day conquer each challenge as it came,
Yep.
and we had to be innovative in what we could do, and we had to find ways to keep people interested in what we had, and I guess to be frank, monetize in different ways. With they may seem like obvious things now, but at the time, not everyone did that. Which would be like, for instance, having a merchandise store, right? Like
Right.
that was something that that was just starting to happen. Having multiple teams, having backup teams, like having teams in different games, expanding into different genres to make sure ours was secure. Those were all things we had to think about, and those were the challenges we had. We had to keep the site going, the stream going. Like we had to keep our partners happy. The biggest thing for me, I mean, my core job was really to push to get new sponsorships and to teach people about who we were. Some of them what was esports, right? And to kind of convince them that this is somewhere worth throwing their hat in
Right.
and throwing some dollars down because they needed to see a return. And though there was some early return coming, it was not, it was not guaranteed. And it's easy to have, they have the attitude of, well, let's wait and see, how you do. And when you're the best in the world and when you have all these viewers and when everything is perfect, we'll jump in. And it's like, but if someone doesn't jump in now, we'll never get all those other things.
Yeah, it's interesting corollary to what you're saying from a already established business, and I'll call it an already established business because you'd figured out what you were doing, and you maybe the revenue wasn't solid, but you were a business, right? Versus where we started as a startup maybe 6 months ago. We were before that, but where we were 6 months ago is kind of the same spot with investors, right? We wanted to get some investment so we could grow quickly because the space is growing quickly, and we said, this will give us a chance to be relevant. And a big question always was, all right, well, you're not far enough along yet for us to talk to you, right? And that kind of exact mentality you're talking about, even on the investment side, and getting someone to be able to say, I see what you see, right? Like I see why you're investing your life in this, why you're willing to quit your full-time job with 3 kids and a mortgage and go dive headfirst into this, and I see why you work like a gajillion hours a week on this and why you're so passionate, because there is a future in this, and I will come in now and invest in you so you can do those things that are going to drive it forward. So it's to anyone that's an entrepreneur out there, I mention this because I get asked a lot how how were you able to go out and do the things you did? And I say, well, we raised funds, and part of raising funds is always not easy, right? This was not a thing where we walked out and said, hey, we esports now, as the meme goes, right? And everyone was like, hey, here, take our money. That's what people think it is, because we all saw the money that came in for all the big sites. All of a sudden, was it back in April or May when AlphaDraft got their funding, when Unicorn got their funding, when Vulcan got their funding, like all these funding was going on around the same time, and everyone goes, oh, well, it must be that my time to get money in esports. It isn't that easy. And so getting someone, as I like to put it, as you can line them all up at the cliff, but they all look at each other going, I'm not jumping first. When you jump, I'll follow you, but I'm not jumping first. And it took us a
Yep.
long time to get that one guy to really believe in us. And I finally looked him in the eyes and I said, this is the move. This will get us on the map. And he said, I believe, let's do it. And that's how we got the rest of them to follow. And it's kind of the same with sponsors in a way, you know? If you can go, I've got this other sponsor, people go, whoa, they're going to put money in. Well, this must be a real thing, right? But if it's, like you said, balls energy drink and server time, you're not going to get a lot of people to take you too seriously, because like, why do I need to be the first to take this seriously, right? I can be the third and the fourth to take it seriously, and that's okay, right? So
Yep.
definitely a
Uh,
challenge.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head there, Marty. This is something if I could ever teach something to anyone that's interested in doing any business, but particularly esports is my passion, of course, as well. The book that helped me the most from grad school, like if you don't want to get like a super expensive over the top education, you really shouldn't. You could just read one book. It's called Crossing the Chasm. I don't know if you've heard of this
No,
one
I
by
don't know that
chance.
one.
Uh, I can really explain it super quick. The TLDR on Crossing the Chasm is how to basically it's how to take a new product or idea, right? Like a new business even, and get it from the like what's called like the innovative, like the early adopter stage, into becoming something that's accepted mainstream. And the core concept here is that a lot of people have the attitude of, man, I'm just gonna like create this thing and everyone's gonna follow along it and it's just gonna be amazing. And
Build
people
it
are
and
gonna
they will
love my
come, it's called.
yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
No, not at
but cross
all.
So that's what the chasm is. The chasm is that giant like cliff that you see that basically no one's gonna get past that, right? Like
Right.
so the way you do that is actually exactly what you did, which is essentially you find those people that have innovative minds that have the ability to see ahead, and you win them over one at a time. You don't try to
Yeah.
just jump in and expect a million people to follow what you have. You get it's called basically the bowling pin is the author's analogy, right? You need to knock over the first pin because that pin knocks over the other pins,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. And it's I always like to think of us as not an esports company, but a tech company and an entertainment company, right? A tech company in that we have this website, web property, and we are entertainment in that we have the sports team side of things. So esports is the industry we're in, but those are the two types of products we have. And so if I have a tech product, I should probably look at the other great tech companies out there: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So that's exactly what I did when I initially went out there. And I said, how did these guys do it? Because, for example, Facebook came out when MySpace was already a juggernaut, right? How do you jump into a space where there's already a juggernaut? And they did it, right? And one of the things I learned early on is a lot of people do exactly what you said. They build it and go, look, guys, here it is. And the people that find it go, you're right, this is super cool. I'm glad you have it. Problem is, not everyone finds it. And you expect that's going to happen automatically. And they talk about this idea of focusing first when you can, when you're still small enough, every individual customer, right? And so for us, that's users on the site or it's fans of the team. And so we say, any message that comes in through Twitter or Facebook, we try to get back to it if possible. Any tweet, we try to at least engage with it because we can at this size. If you're TSM, if you're Cloud9, you probably don't have the capability to do that. You put out one tweet and it might get 73 responses. You would have someone whose job was literally to reply to Twitter all day long. That's just not financially viable, right? But making people feel like that they're important to you as customers is really important. And so some things as simple as, I remember when we first launched matchups, right, where you can go to our site and say, oh, today Cloud9 is playing Navi and Counter-Strike. It doesn't just say Counter-Strike is happening. I had a guy on Reddit ask that question. I went back to that Reddit thread and replied to him, even though it was 6 weeks earlier. And just his response was dumbfounded, right? Like, wow, thank you for letting me know that. That's awesome. I'm excited because level of customer engagement doesn't always happen. So, we tend to hear in esports a lot of talk about the game side of things, the excitement side of things, all the esports side of things, and not a lot of talk about the business side. And so when I'm going out and learning, I am learning from how to build a great brand from some of the great brands out there, like Cloud9, like Dignitas, who've done a really bang up job of building something iconic. But at the same time, I'm going out and I'm reading about Facebook. The Facebook Effect is another incredible book, and you read about all the places they could have failed miserably, right? There's another group. If you're a budding entrepreneur, I always recommend this. It's called Y Combinator. And Y Combinator, it's out in Silicon Valley. Justin Kahn, who's one of the founders of Twitch, works there full time. Emmett Shear, who's the CEO, he works there part time. It's basically like a souped up incubator, but what it really is, it's the place where a lot of the great tech companies go to become great. And they did about 3 years ago is they put a series out on their YouTube channel. It was called Startup School, I believe, and it's 20 classes in Stanford, and it's just a video of this class in Stanford, and each week is another great founder. Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, one of the founders of Facebook, the guys from Airbnb, like the all-time greats in the tech industry. So you want to learn how to do customer acquisition, go find out how Airbnb convinced people to let strangers stay in their house, right? You want to learn about getting your name out there in a world before we had things like Twitter and Instagram being Twitter and Instagram, right? So it's a really great to go to people who've already done this successfully is kind of my ideal. I know we've veered way off of the questions, and that's kind of what I hope this podcast could be, is a little bit of more just conversational about some of the things people should be doing. But yeah, I mean, a lot of where we broke that chasm, if you will, like you said, is I'll never forget the day I sat one of our investors down and I said to him this. I go, okay, imagine our website was not about esports, it was about the NBA, and the Milwaukee Bucks went for sale. But I could take the Milwaukee Bucks and change their name to Splyce. They could now be called Splyce. Would you want to buy them at a reasonable price? He said, absolutely. I go, well, the Milwaukee Bucks are for sale. Can we buy them? And we had a good laugh about that, of course. We were having a beer at a local pub talking about this. But, this was a passion project, of course. I'm a fanatic of League of Legends. I love watching it. It's so exciting. But it's a business decision too, right? Why am I getting a League of Legends team? Well, it's about growing this amazing brand and tying ourselves. I always say, like, if you want to tie to a brand, wouldn't you want to be tied to the New York Yankees? Right? You don't want to be tied to, I don't know, a golfer or someone who plays shuffleboard. I mean, you could. Probably not the same as the credibility that comes with being tied to the New York Yankees or the LA Lakers or Arsenal or something like that. So that's where we went with looking at this idea of let's go to the top right there and then start adding on the pieces. So, okay, next question for you. Did you think you'd end up doing this role, like where you are in AlphaDraft, when you started taking esports as a career more seriously? Like when you jumped in with CounterLogic, is this the kind of path you expected, and why not? Like, how did you end up in this kind of bizarre path then?
Sure, absolutely not. I mean, definitely not. I really, like I said, actually, my core desire was to be, in game design and production. I actually wanted to be a producer, right, for a game company. So that was what I hoped I would get to ultimately. And then, this was just, like I said, it's something that came along. Being part of esports, being, part of running a business, certainly was something that, I have a background in, but it wasn't really, I wanted to be more on the creative side. But this just seems like I get put in this role all the time. And even the same could be said, post CLG, I ended up doing consulting. I did consulting for startups for, a lot of, mostly teams, of course, right?
Yeah, some of your expertise was, right?
Yeah, that it is. And there were some personal reasons for that too. Why I had to do things that way. But, that's how life works. You can't just, predict it out entirely. And here at AlphaDraft, I actually started as that was just another, organization I was consulting for when I first started, right? And then I got to meet the CEO, and I realized how passionate he was about, what he is. He's a fantasy sports fanatic, right? He's a fantasy football fanatic. He's been doing that for like a decade, and he saw the opportunity for his dream, his passion to be part of video games as well. He had learned about League of Legends. He knew about the audience size, and he was like, "Oh my god, like this could be a thing."
Right.
And he really sold me on this. And initially, I was a little bit more on the platform designs. I wasn't like in marketing or biz dev or anything specifically, right? Like I was designing the scoring for games. I actually created the first salaries. So this would have been like, again, anyone who remembers this will tell you they're terrible, right? But like the first set of salaries for the fantasy salaries, that's what I was doing, right? The way like we were going to score, we were doing scoring models, and I worked with someone who works at AlphaDraft now. His name is Alan LaFleur. He worked at
I
Mocha
know
Fire.
Alan. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And we just were like putting together ideas for this thing as like, I was a consultant. Alan wasn't even on board. So I didn't know where I was going to go. They thought I was going to be, a community manager. First it was like, oh, maybe for League of Legends I'll be the community manager, and then like then the CEO realized, oh, Robert doesn't even play that much League of Legends anymore. There are like young people that know infinitely more than him now about the meta and like all of the players, and they follow everything.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, Robert used to be a CS pro. Let's have him do CS like CS:GO, right? And so I did that for a while, which was basically community management means more about actually it's an operational thing. It means creating the contests to join, basically the fantasy, the matchups, right? If it's going to be a head-to-head or, a 50-50 or a tournament structure on which events are happening on DreamHack versus like, the Pro League finals and all of that, which was pretty cool, but that still wasn't quite it. So I kept getting like, I did that, and because we were small, we didn't have anyone to do it until we hired someone that was 100% dedicated to that. So then I moved on to the next thing, which was customer acquisition and marketing. And then from there, it went to, well, the real thing that we need is biz dev. We need to get contracts with big players to make ourselves relevant. We need to work with guys at Faceit or ESL. We need to work with big teams. We need to get some content out so people know who we are.
Right.
And so that's where I ended up. But again, like I'm giving you a double no. No, I didn't even think I'd be like creating businesses. I thought I would be in an established company, in a producer role making video games, and then even at that point, in the business strategy creation world, I didn't even know I'd be in biz dev. I thought I'd be in operations, project management, even content creation.
Right.
That's just the path that that happened. This is what they needed, and it's something I can help with, and I'm happy to. But that's that's how it played out, Marty.
It's interesting because looking at any startup, not just esports, I always like to say that the early people you hire, some you have to hire for very specific skill sets. We have this guy we call the code wizard, right? Like he's our main dev, and that's his skill set. Why we hired him, that's what we need him to do. If he's not working on developing the site, we're probably not using him to the fullest of his ability, right? But other people we bring in, it's like, I'm bringing you in because you are flexible and because I don't know what the future holds. So we recently brought someone on board who we say our general manager. That's the title I gave him. But I told him when I brought him on board, I'm like, your role is going to change a lot because he's been in the industry a long time. He knows a lot of people, and ultimately it's about having the flexibility to go, today can you work on this thing and tomorrow work on this completely different thing. And startups have to have that flexibility, because if you don't, the market shoots right past you. You mentioned like kind of just going with the flow. I think even businesses have to do that sometimes, where an opportunity comes along and it's not what you initially thought. Like, we didn't think we were going to have teams. That's why we used to be called Follow Esports. Follow Esports is a terrible name for a pro team. It's perfectly fine for a website, awful for a pro team, right? And we got this opportunity. It came up and we said, this makes sense. It makes sense right now. It might not make sense in 6 months. So it's not about whether we're ready for it. This is the opportunity. We have to decide if it's the right one for us, if that makes sense. So I think a lot of businesses miss out on that sometimes, where they go, well, either A, they take it because they feel like it's an opportunity and they should have put it off, or B, they skip it because they didn't think it was perfect timing for them. And that's probably the most delicate job you have in business development and or CEO, which is mostly business development, in my opinion, in any startup, is deciding when to say no and deciding when to say yes, right?
It's a lot more challenging than people give it credit for, and you definitely know that at this point, Marty. I know you've had a lot of other experiences with this, but I'm sure when you started Follow Esports, now Splyce, like that's something that you've really seen, where those decisions that Like it may sound like, oh, that's easy. Like just you're just deciding something. Nope, that shapes your future. Nope, that could be the end or the very beginning of something huge, right?
Yeah, I literally get in my when we parted ways with our first Counter-Strike team, within 4 days, I had probably 25 Counter-Strike teams in my inbox asking to be our next Counter-Strike team, right? Like people went, "Oh my God, these guys will sponsor a Counter-Strike team. Let's email them from everywhere in the world." I was apparently going to start a new team. This one guy wanted to start a new team in China because I guess I'm hearing China is starting to get a big Counter-Strike scene. So that's how far-reaching that news got. Is like we were an organization that that was missing a team, and even beyond that, we still every week I probably get, I don't know, 6, 7 different opportunities in my inbox. And Odie from Dignitas, who I consider like my mentor at this point, who's guided me through a lot of this, he told me the best single piece of advice I've learned now. He said, toughest job we have is knowing when to say no or when to let something go, right? And it really is, because it's constantly on my mind every day. Is are all the things we're doing the right things? Should we be adding on something, and should we be subtracting something? Because your runway is only so long, right? So until
Yep.
we're all the Dallas Cowboys, and then we can just take baths in cash or something like that. That's because we esports now, right? So
Yeah, we definitely make sure you film that when you take a bath and camera. Okay. I don't mean that. I'm sorry, I don't mean that.
well, did you see that Broken Shard? Actually, there's actually a picture of him taking a bubble bath on Twitter the other day in the Dignitas team house. So I believe he's on his phone or something while he's in the bubble bath in his full jersey and everything. So it's
Well,
pretty fantastic. So
that sounds like a thing. Okay. Interesting.
okay, so I mean, let's talk a little bit about like so daily fantasy is obviously a newer thing in esports, right? It's been around a lot longer in traditional sports. How do you see, like, I guess because I see like, I'm going to throw a little shameless, not shameless, but like a random fact. When I was 11 and 12 years old, I was the guy that started fantasy in my neighborhood, right? So I went out and got the newspaper because my dad worked for the newspaper, and I would get a bunch of guys together, and I'd be like, all right, we're going to do this thing called fantasy football. I read about it in a book or something, and I would figure out how to do it. And I'd sit down every Monday morning and do the scores, and then sit down Tuesday and do the Monday Night Football scores. And I would run a league with just 5 friends. There were 6 of us. So I'm as old school fantasy as you can get. I'm talking like 1989 or 90 or something like that. So,
Oh Jesus! Most
yes,
of these people weren't born yet. Marty. You have to be careful with that.
yeah, I know, right? But what I was going to ask is, how do you see fantasy esports fitting into the esports realm? Because I see that like fantasy sports really is an important piece of the sports culture at this point, right? Like it's almost part of sports now. It's not a separate thing. Whereas in esports, it is kind of like most things. Most things are very segmented in esports, unlike traditional sports. Do you see that that's where we're heading with fantasy sports and a kind of a similar model?
I mean, certainly, to be completely blunt, that's absolutely the hope, Marty. This is where I'd say the ideology is probably most aligned with how Riot, sees their game and sees esports, right? Which is, again, I don't mean to put words in their mouth, but or speak for them, but the whole concept of, at least when I spoke to them a lot in the very early days, was whatever brings us to the level of traditional sports, whatever brings us to that kind of like viewership number, the kind of cultural integration, to be frank, not just like, oh, this is cool, like this is culturally acceptable, and then beyond acceptable, this is like, Marty, when you and I go out to a coffee shop and you're talking about like what Reckles did today and at the LCS, or you know what I mean, like, not just accepted, this would be part of culture, mainstream culture. That was their take on it, was follow the sports model, right?
Right.
And it was several, when I say sports model, I know that's a vague term, and I know every sport is different, but there are some key elements that are similar, right?
Yeah, every sport is different in the actual game and maybe the community, but when you get up to the business level, it's so much crossover. So
Exactly, and so this is that same idea. So from their point of view, it was like, well, doing something on a scheduled like a regimen schedule, like throughout the week or weekend, that like LCS, right? LCS is that step to be like football happening on Sunday, or you get what I'm saying, right?
yeah,
Like we started having slated times for it. And you'd have to schedule out ahead of time, which allows people to plan their time, their day around this, right? You know, basically having sponsorships and branding as part of it, like, which is what something sports have that like allows advertisers to integrate into that audience.
Yep.
That's something as well. Set salaries for all these players. I mean, that's something that Riot brought. Obviously, so fantasy. So to get to your question more directly, right? Fantasy sports and as fantasy esports is the next step. I mean, it's a little bit of a pretty forward step, I'd say. Of because it took traditional sports a long time before fantasy existed for a while, but it didn't become what it is today for until very recently, right?
It was
very
it was ad revenue. If you remember, like it was like you and your buddies form a team, and Yahoo's expecting to make some money because you visit their page all the time, and that was the model, right? And that was it, and it was so basic, right?
Yeah, it was kind of like for funsies, but we would get some foot traffic from it, right? And so again, our ideology is the same. Basically, this is something that raises the viewership of sports. More people that have fantasy teams in football or basketball or anything, they're going to watch more, right? Because it's more interesting. I mean, that we use the phrase interesting, but I don't know what it's more fun, it's more exciting. Say what you will, but you have something on the line, right?
Yeah.
You are competing against your friends even, or you're competing against a bunch of people you don't know. And that could be, some of them could be just for free, and some of them could be for, cash. And obviously, once you raise the stakes on something, that makes it more exciting for you. So you have kind of an interest in what's going on and because it's not betting, it's not like, one outcome. It's not just like this team beats this team. You're going to have several players you selected that you might not otherwise watch. So I'm sure you understand the model, but for example, a lot of people say I'm a TSM fan, right? I just love TSM. They're the best, right? I love everything about them. I'm sad about Dyrus, retiring kinds of right? Like, but that's my team. Okay, there's a ton of people like that, but the difference is when you play fantasy, you can't just pick TSM, right?
Right. You will
train
lose that way if you do that.
You actually can't. Like it doesn't work because fantasy. So people that may not understand it completely is you have to draft multiple people in in the roles of the game.
That's true. Yeah.
In the position, and it can't be it actually can't be all from the same team.
Well, we used to have a running joke because I'm from Western New York that when we play football, there'd be always the one guy that's like, I'm going to get all the Buffalo Bills, and if they got close, someone would just take the last one just to spite that guy, So he'd now have like 9 Buffalo Bills in the major key positions, and he couldn't get that last one. So
that's hilarious.
That's guys and kids being kids, they say, right? So
that's funny. Well, I don't, I need to be careful because I don't know the exact way they're structured on some of these sites, but the FanDuel AlphaDraft way is there are limitations to how many you can't actually do that. First, you're salary capped on it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So for TSM, typically that would be a higher salary team in North America. You couldn't actually do it, right? And there are actual constraints on some of these sites. I've played back before we had the ban on playing internally. We can only do for funsies games at this point.
Right.
When I played on Vulcan and other sites, there's always going to be you can only select X number on per team, right? And there's a good reason for that. I mean, again, if it's done in a good way, the salary alone could do it. But you understand what I'm saying. So this is a key component, which is teams and players you may not have been as interested in, before. You will have a stake in what's happening. Basically, you'll be excited to see that play from whoever it might be. But if it's Impact or whoever, right?
Right.
And normally you would be like, well, that's not my team or my guy, but today it is, right? Because it's daily fantasy.
Right.
And today I care about what he does, so I'm going to watch every game. And this is personal for me. I didn't understand the model completely either because I'm not from a background of daily fantasy sports, let alone fantasy sports in general. And I watched, no surprise, right? I watched Counterlogic Gaming, I watched TSM, and I watched Dignitas. Then I was done, right? And not slighting other teams. You guys are all great, and I love it. Just gotta say that. But once I was learning about AlphaDraft, I was like, okay. I'm watching literally every LCS game, and I never did. I know that probably sounds terrible because you think as a team manager you would have, but I watched my team and I watched the teams that were good.
Yep.
I thought they were good at the time. I'm like, okay, these two teams are not good. I don't care. I hate to give examples because it's insulting, but it could be You probably could give a better football example than me, but that game where like it's not the Broncos and the Cowboys,
or when it's a stomping of the like when
yeah,
I remember watching when I was a kid, the 49ers were they were a big deal. Right? They won
they
like
were a
a
big deal.
ton
They
of
were
Super
one of
Bowls.
my two. Yeah,
Yeah, and so then they'd go into these games and you're like, oh look, they're playing the I don't know Bengals again, and the score is 47-3. Like you might tune in for 20 minutes, and then you're just done watching when they're up 21-0 already. So, yeah,
right.
I get that, and it's interesting you mentioned this idea of driving fan interaction because I think of this idea. So, fantasy basketball is what I played a lot during my college years, and then through afterwards. In fact, my buddy Steve, still to this day, every year he sends me an email. It's like, "Come on, Marty, you got to play fantasy basketball." And I always say, Steve, you know I'm going to sign up in 2 weeks into the season. I'm never going to log in again, right? And it's just a kind of a running joke. But playing fantasy basketball, there's an interesting conundrum when all of a sudden the best player available by a mile is a guy you hate, right? And you have this, do I take him and then feel dirty when he gets me a lot of points and wins me a game? Or do I pass on him and potentially ruin this roster I have? And it almost likens to any kind of traditional competition model, right? If you were building the not Golden State Warriors, I'm sorry, Denver Nuggets back when Latrell Sprewell was on that team. For anybody that doesn't know, Latrell Sprewell literally spit in his coach's face on the sideline. Like, spit in his coach's face. He was also one of the 10 best players in the world. Like, he was a phenomenal player. Now you have this balance of, do we work with this guy to try and make him be worth our organization, or do we cut ties? It's no different than fantasy in a very kind of tiny little microcosm of your own little house and your own little computer doing that thing. Will I feel dirty about picking Latrell Sprewell on my team, knowing he was a scumbag at the time? So I always found that kind of dichotomy really interesting when drafting. And you'd have those times when you go, oh God, all right, I'm picking this guy. I really hope he does poorly, and I hope I lose games.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, you definitely nailed that one, Marty, as well. Like that's kind of one of the keys here is, you know, basically increasing the viewership and user engagement in these things is a way to increase, basically the industry as a whole and its value, right? It's
Yeah.
personal value to you as a spectator, and frankly to other, both endemic and non-endemic sponsors who, an advert absorption will double because you have something that you're more interested in that you wouldn't be normally, right? That's really the key here, and that's the key to raising the bar in terms of user engagement, excitement about the games, and that will bring on more outsiders in that want to participate in that as well, because they know what those numbers are showing. They know what the viewership's like, and of course they're going to want to advertise to you as
Right,
well.
right. So I'm going to jump a little bit just because we're going to run short on time, and there's a couple of let's talk big picture questions. So lots of big VC money coming in. Everyone's talking about it. Immortals, Energy. We've got companies like Unicorn and stuff like that are, Mark Cuban, all these big names that we're hearing. I mean, the owners of the Sacramento Kings, and we've got Lincoln Park, and just like very mainstream names, Carmelo Anthony, all putting money into esports. So, tell me, I mean, I'll make this as open a question as I can. What are your thoughts on this? Good, bad? I don't know. Are you excited about it? Do you see more of it coming?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say really that the way this is happening right now, I think it's time for it. It's something that it's something that people expected in an industry that grows to a certain size, right? It's for me, it's kind of tough because back at the time when I started, it wasn't done that way at all. I actually didn't know any investment-based startups, right? We all bootstrapped ourselves and had grassroots growth, and maybe I kind of have that old regard for that. But
Yeah.
what's happening now is, I mean, the barrier to entry is pretty high, and the potential is astronomical. I mean, people have said it for a long time, but we're actually seeing that potential be reached now, and the viewership numbers, and how much money is being spent on these leagues and the scene, and so. Obviously, that's a sign of healthy growth, generally, right? To have big names come in and big investors. It seems like in some of these some of the larger games, it's almost a prerequisite now. If you see the salaries that players are commanding, and what it costs to run an organization, as you probably know,
Yep.
that's not something where you can I knew a lot of guys that were somewhat similar to me. Were like, yeah, we worked in IT, or we worked, we had a normal job, and then we could throw some money down into some of the players and get them started, and they could make their living off the winnings or whatever. It's not
Right.
like that now. It's not. And so these guys need to be here. It's again, I would say a prerequisite for some of like the League of Legends LCS North American teams, probably EU as well. I mean, it's Korea, I guess, would be the same.
Well, did you
Even
see?
China.
I don't know if you saw Elements or the was it? No, I'm sorry, Gambit. The statement they put out of why they sold.
No, I didn't.
So this is really interesting. For those of you that didn't know, Gambit sold their slot to, I think it's Vitality, the French organization, and it was really interesting. They put in the statement that the market had hit a spot where an old team like them essentially couldn't compete salary wise, and it made more sense for them to accept a payment that will give them some foundation and drop down to challenger. So they're going to field a challenger squad and try and fight their way back in. And we're in a time where challenger is actually almost more competitive than ever. We're seeing teams being brought into to the point where the major teams like aren't even necessarily supporting challenger teams because they have to put so much into their major teams, their LCS teams, that they're like, well, I can't do that and challenger, so I've got to pick one or the other in a way. So gone are the days of having 15 players on roster, and you have these other backups over here who are just waiting for a chance and stuff. There's big high stakes here because people are starting to get in the game, and I think the Gambit model is not a bad idea, honestly, for a team like that, where they kind of said, look, the LCS slot is something we can earn back if we belong there, if our roster belongs there, not an organization, but their roster.
Right.
And we can be a more stable organization. Because one of the things I guess I learned early on as I started to get to know esports is a lot of companies live paycheck to paycheck, right? Like where one sponsor disappears or one check is late and they have a problem, right? All of a sudden they can't make payments or something has to be cut. And that's a really big problem and that's any new industry. It happens in theater. It can happen on some lower budget films. Unless you're the big boys where Paramount has, here's $100 million, go make the new, I don't know, James Bond or whatever, right? And they're just cutting checks left and right, no big deal. But in an industry in its growth phase like this, I think this is not it's not the wrong kind of steps it's supposed to happen, right? It's supposed to weed out in a way, and weed out's unfortunately makes a kind of a sad connotation, but weed out the organizations that aren't going to make it. And I think Gambit, I'll kind of kudos to them for being smart enough to say, hey, if we do this, we won't be around in a while. So maybe we need to change our strategy so we will be around in a while. And now I don't know that everyone else would have been able to pick up on that. You know what I mean?
Right. No, that's actually. I'm glad you brought that up. I actually ended up. I'm sure you can tell I Googled things real quick on this call.
Yep, yep.
I have heard of other organizations that have done the same, and that's exactly what I'm saying here. I'd say the warning, and to say something maybe a little bit dicier than what you might expect, is the obvious. Is the warning here is as long as we're not in a bubble, right? Like that's
Right.
It's great to hear, and it's great that these people come in. But we've seen this happen before where some big players have come in and they've done huge projects and they've actually overreached and they didn't work out, right? I'm not going to say names, I'm thinking of previous televised leagues.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Probably know what I'm talking about.
You don't need to say it because everybody knows what you're talking about. So
Things like that, right? And so to see these guys here is good, and it's good for healthy growth as long as they are aware that you need to take these expectations tempered, right? The numbers of esports are not the same as the ratings you get for TV viewing, right?
Right.
The viewership numbers are different in the way they're counted and the way uniques are counted in the regions. I know I could just go on a bunch of tangents on things like bots on Twitch or whatever platform, right? Like it's a little bit it could be misleading to some, and so if people are coming in with expectations that are a little too high, that is kind of the creation for a bubble that could reverse, right? And that would be very bad for the industry. And that's why healthy growth is good, but overly explosive growth where people saw one investor jump in and they all jumped into something that I'm not saying that's everything, but I'm saying in this case, if now that Mark Cuban's here, or now that this much money is raised for an LCS team, if that team ends up not making a profitable business model out of what they've done, that's going to scare others away. So because it wasn't slow and because it's huge amounts of money, and a lot of people jumped in at once because maybe it seemed like it was time and they didn't want to get left behind, it may be still a little early. That would be my warning.
Right.
And that would be the downside potential, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of the whole risk reward thing of getting in early in any market, though, right? The people that were the first .com people, they got in early, they got out early, they made a bunch of money, and then some people got in later, got out later, or didn't get out and lost all their money, right, when the bubble burst.
Oh yeah.
And that's not the only example of that. I think that I mean, I'm in Rochester, home of Kodak, right, one of the great companies of all time, who literally went bankrupt a couple years ago because digital cameras came. Kodak didn't see it as a real thing that was going to stay, never caught up, and they faded into obscurity. We have all these ghost towns of Kodak parks around Rochester that now are other businesses, and from when I grew up, that was like the dominant force in our town. And so I kind of, that's I guess I'd say that's any industry as they're going into their massive change period, because there's going to be many of those in different industries. We had an esports 10 years ago, or whatever the exact time frame was, when Korea picked up on StarCraft 2 and decided sorry, on Brood War, and decided it belonged on television, right? That was a massive change, and that changed the industry forever, basically. It's happening again. But it could be the change that some people get rich and pop out and the industry fails. Hopefully, it's the change that makes the industry thrive, right, and grows it into a true force. And I will tell you, I was earlier this week, I went to Facebook for this esports summit they held, and they had a bunch of us there where we got to talk about what the future looks like for esports. And what I left with, beyond just like a bunch of learning and talking to them and seeing how they're treating esports like they treat traditional sports, is that they see this as a for real thing, and they know they can't let it pass by in order for them to stay relevant, right? Facebook is a thing that has to be relevant, just like esports, just like the movies. Anything that you choose to do, has to stay relevant for it to matter. And I think that signs of things like Facebook putting their hat in the game are a really positive side, because that's not VC money, that's not bubble money, that is support structure, which is something I think esports significantly lacks, is infrastructure to keep this industry floating. Everything from where are all team jerseys going to be sold one day, like the NFL, right? Teams don't sell their NFL jerseys. There's a company that makes those, sends them out, and sends a check to each team every month, right? Who's going to manage tickets, like Ticketmaster? Who's going to be, who's doing all these infrastructure things? And I think as more of that starts to happen, I think we'll feel a little more comfortable.
I totally agree. Actually, one of the specifics you brought up, did you ever see some of the news about the the merchandise stores and Riot? I don't want to like bring up too much of a hot topic thing there, but I don't know if you saw that at all, Marty.
No.
Where this was something I saw on Reddit. I think it was from Richard Lewis's thing. That it was about essentially Riot managing the jerseys and basically the merchandise store for all of the teams in LCS.
Yep.
And then there would be cuts split between the team and Riot Games. If after this call, I'd say it's something that's, if it's interesting to you, you should actually check it out, because it's kind of a hot button topic, because it is along the line. I think that's the same. That is definitely, to me, that's not surprising, because that's the way, again, Riot kind of seems to think and take the model, which is, again, like how NFL is, or other sports.
Right.
There is some pushback on it, though, which is why I say it's a little bit of a hot issue, because of course there's going to be discussion on what's a fair price to split, and is that too much control or not. I think it's in general kind of a good thing to have this, because that is putting the infrastructure in place. It's just you might step on someone's toes when you do something like that, of course, too.
Yeah,
So
I would
it's
say
a
that.
trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously familiar with it, being an LCS owner, and the one thing they came out and said, and just in case anyone doesn't know, is that it was voluntary, right? You aren't required to do this by any means. That's not the type of thing. They're not these totalitarian dictators saying you must, which was, I think, a little bit of the problem. I think Andy was one of the first people to come out, Reginald, and say, guys, we're not required to do this. It was optional, So, and that's Reddit on occasion, right? And so I'm sure this will end up on Reddit now, me saying this about Reddit, and that'll be a thing. So, but anyway, the really interesting thing to me about this whole idea is, if you read, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, it was either Energy or Immortals. I want to say Energy. It was Energy, because it was the Sacramento Kings guy did an interview, I want to say on the Score, and he literally talked about how they want to be able to bring things like how jerseys and how merchandise sales is managed, because we don't have these structured, organized things, whereas look at how merchandise is managed in the NBA, right? That's a cash cow for them. And there's fans out there that want these things in organized fashion so they don't have to work so hard. they want to have like what I'll point to Cloud9 because Cloud9 is a great example of where their gear is everywhere. I don't know specifically how they do it, but they do a great job of it. When I go to an event, there's Cloud9 swag everywhere you walk, right? And there's a level for us to grow as an industry, and it's probably game specific, kind of like NFL versus NBA, etc., where it doesn't have to be so much work, where you're giving a percentage up, not because it's a bad thing, but because literally you go like this, send me a check every month for my, because you're using my IP to sell, but I
Yeah.
do nothing,
It's
right?
it's not your. I mean, from a business standpoint, and you probably know better than I do, Marty. It's not your core competency. I mean, at least
Right.
it's generally. I
I
mean,
have
most
no
people did.
idea how to sell merchandise.
I didn't come into esports like, oh man, like I'm gonna sell like swag and shirts and stuff, and
Yeah, yeah.
that's my core business, right? It's actually you should really stick to the core as much as possible. So I agree with you on that point very much, very
That's
much.
and that's a great place to kind of wrap things up. I always wanted to kind of wrap it up on a tip I guess I would give to every esports company or entrepreneur is I think core competency is a really important thing some people miss. And some of the other startups I've worked in, there was always talk about like other opportunities. And at first we were all excited about them because they sound like exciting ideas. And what we ended up coming back to in the end was this thought of, wow, these guys, or not these guys, this thing doesn't fit what we know how to do and what we do best, and it's going to take resources away from what we do best. Even when we were doing the teams, this became a question. Should we take the teams? And I said, you know what? Yes, this is something I do really well. Talent management goes right back to when I did in theater. This is teams is like my almost more of my core competency, and Vinny and Jeff who are working with me, they're the website guys, and so the minute you start to go, well, let's just do merchandise just so I can keep 100%, well, that's silly. If you guys are a merchandise maven, man, go for that, right? Like I've heard stories about certain owners. I won't say this specific names because I don't know if I'm 100% correct, but that this person was really good with sponsors. So as an owner, they took that on because they went, well, look, I can sell sponsorships. I don't need outside help because I'm really good at that. Whereas another company should be smart enough to go, I have no connections. I don't know anybody. I'm going to hire somebody that does. And that's not because I want to lose that 10, 15, 20%, whatever. It's because I know they're going to bring so much more value in. I'll end up in the net positive in the end anyway. So that's our tip of the day, or tip of the week, if you will. I'm not going to coin any phrase on it, but make sure you're always looking at what your core competency is, and there's always an opportunity to take a step back and say no to something. So this is our shameless plug section. Robert, you want to give us any shameless plug or shout outs?
Shameless plug
Yeah.
section. Thank you, Marty. I mean, obviously, I thank you very much for having me on here. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to check out, AlphaDraft, absolutely, you can, go to our website, just alphadraft.com. You could, tweet at AlphaDraft if you have any questions for how to play. Love to see you guys on there and trying out some games and playing some fantasy. That's really it for me. I mean, you can see I got this is I didn't make this.
Oh, look at that swag right there.
Swag, right? So maybe we'll have shirts that we're selling one day, Marty, and maybe that's something we can talk about. Who's gonna sell the Alpha Draft shirts, right?
That's right. There'll be Alpha Draft shirts. That's the division, right? Alpha Draft shirts. So
I mean, I've been asked. This is my very shameless plug here. I don't know who makes. I like blazers and I like sport coats, and that's kind of been my thing in esports. So maybe one day there'll be like some esports branded blazer, like a caster
hell
blazer.
yeah, I like that.
That's my next business model, by the way. So,
Nice,
just
nice.
yeah.
Well, Robert, thank you for being on and being our first victim. I mean, I've never even streamed before, so Robert got to find that out about 10 minutes before we went live, that I'm like finagling with the settings and stuff. And thank you to all of my fantastic staff who helped me set this up, some of my players and my managers and such, because I asked them stupid questions like, where do I find my stream key and things like that. So also, my shameless plug is make sure you check out Splyce.gg, and we've got every event listed you could ever want to watch. On top of that, some great articles. I believe today we have League of Legends from League of Emily. I think tomorrow we've got some Dota coming out and some Counter-Strike from Lurpus. We're trying to grow to the point where we'll eventually have content from every single game across all esports. Check out our Twitter, SplyceGG, and Splyce Pro is the team. Facebook, SplyceGG, Splyce Pro. It's all on the screen. You guys can see it. You could follow me on Twitter, but I'm not the interesting one. Follow
Sure.
the main teams. Those are the guys.
Marty, where can people get this podcast?
Yeah, so we're gonna we'll get it posted on the VODs and Twitch right away, and then we'll get it tossed over to YouTube. Some people have requested a audio only file, and I gotta figure out how to do that. But I've again will tap my resources and say, hey guys, I have no idea how to do this, and I'm smart enough to know what I don't know. So we'll figure it out. We'll make sure to get some tweets out there. So follow us on Twitter to find out. Good stuff.
Sounds great. Thank you, Marty.
Thanks everyone. Have a good one.